Hi, what you're about to see is an interview with a vendor in the space in and around data mesh. We'd like to thank Nick Heudecker for graciously doing these interviews with vendors. We'd also like to make it clear that the data mesh community and data mesh learning doesn't necessarily endorse anything that these vendors are talking about, but that we wanted to give them a voice to talk about what they may offer in the space, so people are aware of vendors, because obviously if everybody has to build everything themselves, the data mesh is going to be pretty hard. So with that, we really thank Nick for doing this great work, and we hope that this is good and useful to you.
Hey everybody, I'm Nick Heudecker, back again with another data mesh vendor interview. This time, my guest is Christian Romming from Eht-leap. Christian, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Nick. Yes, my name is Christian Romming. I'm native of Norway. I now live in the Bay Area, founder of Eht-leap. We are a data integration company. We help companies get data from all kinds of places into their data warehouse or data lake or lake house or mesh or whatever you want to call it these days. Yeah, we've been around for about a decade, and we are doing cloud native ETLT is what we call it.
So you've been around for a decade as Eht-leap, or were you a spin-off of a consulting company or a services company? Where did you come from, I guess?
Yeah, so before I started Eht-leap, I was CTO at an ad tech company here in San Francisco, where we had all kinds of data. We had 0.5 terabyte of log data that we ingested every day. We had 20 different partners that would send us data in all kinds of formats and over all kinds of protocols. We had our data about our users in a database, and then we had data scientists and data analysts that needed to access all this stuff, right? Like, to get that elusive customer 360 view or user 360 view. That ended up being tremendously time consuming, right? We had, this was before the days of Snowflake, but the ETL challenge was very similar. I think we're running, Cloudera Hadoop on EC2, so we're running queries in Hive, and but before we could do that, we needed to centralize all the data. So we were, our team was building integrations with all these sources. We were creating schemas, piping data over and trying to make that robust. And in spite of, I had several engineers dedicated to just doing that full time. But it was still, it felt like no matter how much effort we put into it, and no matter how many hours, there was always another source or a pipeline that wasn't quite robust, or there was always more to do. And so the short version of the story is we looked around for ETL tools. ETL has been around for a long time, but we couldn't really find anything that suited our specific needs. So that led to me starting Eht-leap. I looked around, I saw other companies struggling with the same stuff, and so we set out to solve it.
So to your point, there are a lot of data integration ETL companies out there. You can DIY your own solution if you choose to. What's differentiating about Eht-leap in, admittedly, what is a crowded space?
So first of all, I think one thing to note is that we were born in the cloud, right? So we are, in fact, our product only works on AWS. We are very tightly integrated with AWS services. So we use, S3 for data storage. We use DMS for CDC. We work with Snowflake, Databricks, Redshift, and S3 as destinations. We support all kinds of sources, whether they're on AWS or off AWS, but the destination is always the cloud. So a couple of things that makes us sort of stand out from the crowd. We have the ability to deploy inside of the customer's own virtual private cloud. So that sets us aside from some of the other cloud native ETL vendors. And we have a focus on semi-structured data. So our customers can wrangle data as part of their data pipeline. So that's very useful if you're dealing with files and events and that sort of thing.
And so is your processing engine like a streaming or event based, or is it more kind of batch oriented?
Yeah, it's all of the above, right? So we have we started out with doing micro batching like everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
More recently the destinations, right? Redshift, Snowflake, Databricks, they've started offering streaming ingestion as part of their solutions. That's now sort of somewhere between beta and GA for most of them. And we have first class support for that too, right? So yeah, it's both streaming and micro batching.
Interesting. So I mean, on the Cribl side, right, we're also a kind of a data pipeline company. We're not kind of, we are a data pipeline company, but our focus is very much on logs, metrics, and traces. And so I think we're kind of in the same space, but our targets are different, right? Our customer profiles are very, very different here.
Yeah.
From an interaction perspective, right? Like, a lot of the ETL tools that are out there today either require a lot of SQL knowledge, or you're using DBT, maybe you're writing Python. So for developers that are using Eht-leap, what do they have to know? What does that look like?
And I think this is a good way into a good segue into the data mesh discussion as well. We very much believe in kind of meeting the user where they are, right? So whether they're data engineers, we have APIs, we have event-based architecture, for example, that they can plug into. If they're a data analyst, right, whose job is to gather insights and not code, right? We have our data wrangler that makes it possible for them to create pipelines from any source actually without writing a line of code.
And that's a graphical environment, I imagine.
Pardon? Sorry.
It's more of a graphical environment.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it's like data prep, if you're familiar with that. It's this idea that you're looking at a sample of your data and then you're assembling a script that's represented in English on screen by interacting with the data. So you can like mark a white space character and it will suggest splitting on white space, right, as the operation. And then we take that and compile it into efficient code that we run on elastically scaling infrastructure for the actual computation. Right, so the kind of the interface, right, is a no code, I guess you can call it no code data prep type interface, but then it actually scales under the hood, right, to be extremely efficient and robust.
So you mentioned this is a good segue into the data mesh conversation, and that no code capability is certainly top of mind, I think, for a lot of companies that are looking to scale creation of their data products. Are you getting questions from customers today about data mesh, or is it something you're introducing to them, maybe as a new concept or topic?
I would say it's a bit of both. I think that obviously the term data mesh is fairly new, but the concepts underneath, right, the concepts behind the data mesh are not really that new, right? This idea of having a centralized data platform, which is what we're helping with, governance, domain ownership, right? Like it's not really new. I think kind of the way to look at it is a little bit new. But I would say for us and kind of for our journey, we started out working with a lot of venture-backed tech companies that were taking advantage of the new data warehouses and large-scale data processing in the cloud. And over time, we've started working with bigger and bigger companies, and I think bigger and bigger teams, right? Bigger and bigger use cases. And I think the kind of the challenges and solutions that the data mesh concept offer are sort of more relevant to the bigger use cases. So we're definitely seeing it more now than we were a few years ago.
Okay. And you mentioned that, your primary story is around supporting kind of centralized data stores. Is that a common pattern that you see for data mesh implementations? Because I see a little bit of that, but I also see more diverse data stores as well.
Yeah. No, I think like what we see is that you have teams that try to, or companies that try to centralize this, but the solution may also be centralize the techniques, right? But have multiple data stores. So yeah, no, it's really I think the data mesh concept can apply to a lot of different actual implementations. So that there's no sort of one size fits all implementation. But the key, this one of the four pillars, this idea of a self-serve but centralized data platform, I think is a very powerful concept that we see a lot, right? And I think companies that do that well can can reap a lot of benefits from doing that.
I have to agree. I remember years ago when I saw kind of what Netflix had created from their self-service data portal. I was blown away by that, and it seemed kind of like this is obviously where things should go, but there's a huge skills gap to build that kind of infrastructure and build that kind of self-service capability. It's good that people are now starting to implement that, like you in products, or even start to see how they can build that for their own companies themselves. When companies are, or when customers are coming to you or you're going to them, what are their big pain points? Why Eht-leap?
Right.
Why is that winning?
Yeah, I think so. Like we were talking about before, right? This idea that if you're going to DIY data pipelines, it's definitely possible, right? You could. It's not rocket science, but it's a tremendous amount of engineering work to do it well, and to get it up and running in the first place, but then also to maintain it over time.
It's always the day two problems.
Yeah, exactly. It's all things that you weren't thinking. Those also tend to be the less fun things for the engineers which is kind of
we see the same thing. We see the same thing with our customers. Like they're like, oh, I will try and build this. It's like, okay, try, but recognize, and our CEO describes it as the illities, right? Manageability, securability, governability, all those things. They're not fun or sexy to build, and people just don't build them.
Yeah, exactly. So we have components, and I think a lot of the things that our data pipeline is going to do out of the box are applicable to many different situations, and we can that's one of the things we help with. And then another thing is what we call time to value, right? Which is fairly generic concept, but this idea that if you're looking for data insights, you kind of need them yesterday, right? Like and ETL projects have a reputation for being slow and expensive, and I think
ETL should be a 4-letter word.
Right. And so yeah, I think that's we place a big emphasis on getting teams off the ground quickly, right? Ideally during the first week or two, they should have their end-to-end infrastructure and tables ready for analytics ready.
You see, so 1 to 2 weeks to get them kind of up and running. When you encounter friction with your customers, is that typically at the infrastructure side of like, we've got to spin it? Well, clearly not, because you're in the cloud. But are there infrastructure issues? Are there permissions issues? Is it more of like a cultural issue of like, I don't want to let these guys access my data? Where's the friction coming from, if there's any friction at all?
I think there are kind of two answers there. One is for the kind of the initial setup to get something up and running. Yeah, in that case, it's usually fairly tactical stuff. It's like, well, who owns that firewall again? That sort of thing. But I think that those are typically fairly trivial to overcome. But it's sort of the longer term stuff that's where I think it gets both interesting and challenging. The sort of the organizational change that has to happen, right? Like if you're a company that wants to implement a data mesh and you kind of want to get that product thinking around your data, there is a lot of work to do with organizational change, and I think that's where we see a lot of teams sort of get bogged down. But it's also the area where it also gets really interesting, right? Because there's so much potential benefit that you can get from sort of empowering, to use a cliche word, right? Like your employees who are team members who are not traditionally used to using a lot of data as part of their work. So tremendous opportunity. For us, it's also we have this additional dimension of letting people who are not engineers also build their own data pipelines. So sort of adding tools to their tool set around getting use out of their own data pipelines. Out of their own data without actually needing to go to an engineering team to say, hey, can you build me this pipeline, right? They can actually go and do it themselves and get immediate results.
That's, I mean, certainly that seems like a big goal for a lot of companies, be more data led. Have you seen, and there's been this topic for years of data literacy, right? In your experience from what you've seen at Eht-leap, are there kind of the rank and file employees? Do they have enough kind of understanding of data to be effective at creating their own pipelines? The joke is always that I've been telling for years is, everybody wants a data democracy, but you have to have an educated electorate to do it. Are they educated enough to create these things effectively?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a process, right? To get there. I think it's definitely a worthwhile endeavor, though. To essentially educate your own I guess electorate. And we're seeing companies do this well, actually. So if you start with, one thing we've seen work well is if you start with certain use cases, right? You start with typically where you have folks who are particularly motivated, right, to get insights. Then you can sort of build on, and you get them up and running. You let them do something that they weren't able to do before, and then you can sort of build on that, right, to kind of to have the success of that, sort of foster more success, by getting people excited about what they can do, what they weren't able to do before. But yeah, it's a very hard problem, I think, and it takes time to get there.
I think your point about like establish a small success and then that kind of creates a flywheel of excitement and okay, I can do this. Now I can do bigger and bigger things. What kind of challenges do customers face in adopting an Eht-leap? You mentioned the challenges around like product thinking, but are there other challenges that you've seen that companies are dealing with? Maybe they're just starting the data mesh path, or maybe they're not quite there yet.
Yeah, lots of challenges, right? Migration, right? You have data on-prem, just understanding, where the valuable and important data lives, right? Companies are using literally 1,000 different SaaS tools now, right? And what data is actually valuable, that's a challenge. I think that and something that we often help with is kind of reducing the need for having to have engineers on all these domain teams, right? So you have, if you're doing a data mesh, you have your domain teams and the ways for them to work together, and avoiding the need to sort of distribute engineers on all these different domain teams, and instead letting less technical people on the domain teams do their own work, I think is pretty powerful. We have, as an example, at Morningstar, the financial services company, they have lots and lots of data producers, right? Researchers, those types of folks who are essentially creating the data. And Morningstar has now made it possible for them to integrate their own data, right? To take their own data, wrangle it, to get it into their centralized data lake, without a need for engineers. So you have a sort of a centralized team setting that all up for them, and then kind of distributing the work of the actual data pipelines creation, distributing that out, right, to the domain teams, which is I think but yeah, to get there is obviously, that takes time, and it's a challenge, and it requires ambition on the part of the data leadership at the company.
But the returns have to be fantastic once you get that in place, because
It's amazing.
the one thing you can't do is hire enough people, right? It's impossible to attract them, and they're just simply not available. But being able to push that down is a big force multiplier for basically the entire organization.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you mentioned that you are Eht-leap is on AWS today. Any plans to extend to other cloud environments, or AWS is pretty much where the puck is going?
We think that there is a lot of value in being essentially extremely tightly integrated with AWS services. You know, one thing is using the AWS services, but I think that if you dilute yourself too much, what can happen is it becomes sort of it's sort of like trying to take an on-prem ETL tool and moving it to the cloud. It sort of becomes more of a bolt-on, you know, and I think so. Our strategy is to focus on AWS and be the best possible ETL tool on AWS.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And it can be difficult, I think if you do try to go to multiple cloud environments, and you may dilute some of the power of your offering, as you pointed out, right? That tighter integration is often much more powerful than trying to be everywhere all at once. And so if people want to know more about Eht-leap today, where can they find you? Is there a demo or a sandbox environment they can try, or where can they learn more?
Absolutely. So they can sign up for a demo at our website, eht-leap.com. You can also get if you want to just try it out for yourself, we're on Snowflake Partner Connect and Redshift Partner Integration Console. So that would be the easiest place to get started, and you can get a free trial up and running in 5 minutes.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Well, I mean, congratulations. 10 years is a hell of a milestone for a company today. Anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up?
I think that was it. I mean, maybe a couple of more things about the types of things that, whether you use Eht-leap or not, avoiding kind of building your own monitoring, and focusing on avoiding building your own scaling, right? Avoiding the kind of the maintenance of the pipelines themselves is a pretty powerful concept. And I think companies really ought to get out of, as the chief data officer of Morningstar said, they moved from on-prem to AWS because they wanted to get out of the business of building data centers. And they moved to Eht-leap because they wanted to get out of the business of building data pipelines, right? It's sort of an analogous concept there, and I think that's something to keep in mind, that your engineers can focus on, with using a tool like Eht-leap, the engineers can focus on sort of the last mile of the stack specific integration, things like alert routing, that sort of thing, and get out of the business of data plumbing. So yeah, I think that's it.
It's an interesting point, right? I think, engineers want to build things, right? And so they always kind of have this bias of, it's like, if you go see a surgeon, you're going to get a surgery. And there's so little value in recreating that wheel time and again. It's even spawned the entire, kind of data observability concept, where people have these artisanal pipelines that they've created, and somewhere something breaks. They don't really know where, but they need more visibility into all of the different parts of those pipelines. And it can be difficult to kind of talk people down from their bias to build it, when, man, sometimes it's just easier to write a check.
Yeah.
It saves a huge amount of time.
Yeah.
We encounter this conversation quite often at Cribl as well. And people are like, well, why can't I just build this myself? Like, well, like we talked about earlier, you can do the day one, right? Maybe you get in, 2 or 3 different data sources, but, when it comes time for, RBAC and being able to bring in more data sources, and when things change, it can be very difficult to try and scale that kind of development work.
Yeah, exactly. And once you build something that's useful, people will catch on, right? The success breeding more success we talked about before, and engineers very easily get overloaded, right? They get inundated with requests from the rest of the organization for more, as they should be, right? There's kind of the natural path, and in some ways the way you want it to go, but you sort of easily, as an engineer, you become sort of a victim of your own success there, and you end up with having to support a lot of requirements that you didn't initially think about, and spend a lot of your time on essentially supporting the initial functionality that you built, and I think that's it's a good argument for looking to see whether a tool can help you.
Yeah, and another thing can happen as well, and that's that engineer leaves, right? And that this artisanal system, no one really knows how it works. And that's another scenario that I've seen a number of companies fall into of, all right, this thing is running right now, but if it falls over, we don't know what's going to happen. And those systems end up feeding mission critical applications. So yeah, there's definitely a downside to creating your own pipeline, whether it's what you do, which is on the ETL side, or it's what on the data on the observability data side.
Yeah.
No, good stuff. This is a great way to close out the conversation. Well, thank you very much. This is fantastic. We'll get this posted soon, and then if and you've already shared where people can reach out to you, and then we'll get it posted and take it from there. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Nick. Thanks for having me.